It's Adam here for PC Monitors, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at the OSD on-screen display menu system of the Nixxius NX EDG27X. The OSD is controlled by buttons, and they're found at the rear of the screen towards the right side and is viewed from the front. I'll show you a clearer image. There's also a power LED at the bottom there, and that glows blue when the monitor's on and red when the monitor enters a low power state, such as standby. Bit of a strange place to have that power LED. Kind of glows onto the wall, but you can't really see it in a brighter room from the front. You'll see that there are button labels on the buttons themselves, but when you're using the monitor normally, you're in front of it, you can't see those at all. And there's nothing on the screen to give you any kind of indication of what everything does. You'll also see that the buttons are quite close together, and the bottom button there, that's actually the power button. And the one just above that is the enter button, and I keep on pressing the power button instead of the enter button. I had various other complaints. I actually made a little video about this OSD system as a short video, and since then I've used the monitor for a couple of weeks. I still don't like the OSD system. I've become a little bit more used to it, but I'm just going to explain how it works. So if you press the top button, that's how you enter the main menu system, and you then press the button below that to go right or down in the menu system. Below that is the button to go left or up in the menu system. That depends on how far you are into the menu. So that enter button I mentioned before, just above the power button, you have to press that to get deeper into the menu. I just find it really counterintuitive that the up button is below the down button because it's arranged vertically. That really sort of does my head in a bit. And also, if you adjust something, let's say I wanted to adjust the green color channel, you then have to press the enter button and not accidentally press the power button. You then have to move it up or down. If you then just press back, as you might with most menu systems, because you've made your adjustment, it'll just revert to what you had before. You need to press the enter button again to select that adjustment. And because there's quite a distance between the enter button and the main menu button, which is also the back button, it's a little bit of a nightmare, to be honest. It certainly isn't the most intuitive system I've come across. In fact, I'd go as far as to say it's the worst OSD system I've come across, and I've used quite a few. But anyway, I can just about use it, so I'm going to get on with the rest of the video. But anyway, it is what it is. Most people won't need to use it too much. As a reviewer, I do have to use it a lot, but once you've made your adjustments, you've set everything up, hopefully you won't spend too much time with the menu system. If you press the second button before you've actually entered the menu system, that allows you to quickly adjust the volume of the integrated speakers or anything connected to the 3.5mm jack. The third button allows you to do the same with backlight, so that's the brightness control of the monitor, and you don't need to press enter or anything like that here. You can just use your second and third buttons to go up and down respectively. And if you press enter, that allows you to quickly select the input used by the monitor. So the main menu system you would have seen before, quite basic style, sort of looks a little bit Windows 95 or Windows 98, but it does the trick anyway, even though the control system is quite awkward. So the first section there is picture. You've got backlight, which is your brightness control. You've got contrast, sharpness, and you can change that between 0 and 4, with 0 being the least sharp and 4 being the sharpest. 2 is the default. That works well, certainly at the native resolution. There's an aspect ratio setting, so full is the default, and what that will mean is that it's going to use all of the pixels on the screen, regardless of the resolution that you've selected, regardless of your source resolution. You can also change this to 16:9, so that will enforce a 16:9 aspect ratio regardless of the resolution you're using or you've selected, your source resolution. 4:3, which will do the same, but it will enforce 4:3. So I've got this monitor running at a native 2560 by 1440 WQHD 1440p resolution, and I've selected 4:3, so I've got black bars around the image at the left and right sides, and you can see everything's squished together. That's because it's enforcing a 4:3 aspect ratio, despite the fact that I'm running a 16:9 resolution. I'm now running the 1:1 setting. I've actually got the monitor running at 1920 by 1080 Full HD 1080p resolution, because 1:1 with the native resolution, it's just the same as full, it uses all of the pixels. But you can see that this is a pixel mapping feature, so it has 1920 by 1080 pixels on the screen, and there's a black border around the image for the rest of the pixels, so it shows that image without distortion, without stretching things. Whereas if I select the full option instead, still at the full HD resolution, you'll see that it's using all of the pixels, so it's using interpolation, and that's explored in the written review in the interpolation and upscaling section. It's also worth noting that you can change the aspect ratio on this if you've got adaptive sync on. I've actually got adaptive sync on at the moment, so it's not something which is locked off if you're using adaptive sync, as it is on some models. Next up, you've got a setting called Ultra Vivid, and this is another sharpness filter, a bit different to the sharpness slider there. It just has a different effect. You can set that to off, which is the default, low, middle, or high with an ever-strengthening sharpness effect. I find even having this set to low, it does over-sharpen the image quite significantly. At non-native resolution, some people might quite like the look this gives to the image, or perhaps outside that, depending on the content you're looking at, so feel free to use that. So you do have two different sharpness controls on this model, which is quite good flexibility to have, really. Next you've got DCR, Dynamic Contrast Ratio. That's a dynamic contrast feature, and that's explored in the written review. As you'll see, it does blank out your backlight and contrast controls, and it adjusts the backlight brightness according to the image, and it does that all as one unit. It doesn't have local dimming or anything like that. Next you've got colour, and I should also mention that the buttons do have a nice click to them. I will give it that, although I don't really like the menu system. The buttons do have a very tactile feel, a very firm clickiness. You've got colour effect, so these are presets of the monitor. They upset the image in various different ways. There's game, movie, photo, vivid, and standard. Standard's the default. If you select these, you do actually gain full control, but they do make additional adjustments which you can't overcome. So they make some changes to gamma and different changes to saturation that you'll see regardless of what the slider might be set to. I think it's always set to 50. The most obvious example of this would be the vivid setting. This makes some crazy adjustments to the image. Some elements really do stand out in quite a cinematic way. There's quite a lot of depth to some elements, but things are really crushed together. But these presets, I wouldn't recommend you bother using them. I would recommend using standard and making manual adjustments if you like to. But if you do happen to like how these look, feel free to use them. I should also mention that the game mode doesn't change the responsiveness or anything like that. That's a separate control, and none of these settings will change that aspect. So don't feel you're losing out because you're using standard instead of game in terms of responsiveness or anything like that. Saturation, sort of briefly touched upon this before, but this is a saturation slider. You can adjust that in single unit increments. Reducing that enough will make everything monochrome eventually. And if you increase this above 50, it pulls shades closer to the edge of the gamut without expanding the gamut itself. So it crushes things together, it oversaturates things. It doesn't make the most saturated shades any more saturated, it just makes shades that should be less saturated than they are more saturated, if that makes sense. And so that means that you do reduce your shade variety. It gives you quite a weird artificial look, but if you want to increase that a little bit, feel free, but this monitor has a natively wide gamut, and most users will find that more than saturated enough without playing with the saturation slider. You may even want to reduce the saturation slider a little bit, but it's difficult to get the balance right. You'll find that some shades appear still quite heavily saturated, whilst others become quite undersaturated. So yeah, not easy to get the balance right at all by doing that. There's a gamma setting. There's off, which is a factory default, and that's actually the one I recommend using. It's certainly the one on my unit which worked best. Gamma 1.8, 2.0, 2.2, 2.4. These don't necessarily correspond to the actual measured gamma, but it does give you a way to have a lower or higher gamma. There's temperature, so you can change that to user, and that allows you to change the red, green and blue color channels manually. Or you can have that set to 9300 Kelvin, 6500, 5400, and like the gamma values, these don't, or on my unit they didn't, correspond to the actual values that you would measure. But it's again a way of getting a bit of a warmer look to the image, a cooler look, or an even cooler look really. And I don't mean cool as in good, I mean cool as in a high white point. Next up you've got Advance. This allows you to change the volume, so that's another way of changing the volume, which I covered before with a little quick function. Overdrive, you can set that to on or off. If you got that set to on, which is the default, then you have this OD gain slider, and that's your overdrive control. You can set how much greater grey acceleration, how much pixel overdrive is used by the monitor. I do explore this extensively in the review, so I'm not going to repeat that here, but it is very flexible in terms of the levels of acceleration you can use, so you can set that between 0 and 100 in increments of 1. You can enable or disable FreeSync Premium, is what it says here, but it's actually adaptive sync, so it's going to enable or disable your NVIDIA G-Sync compatible mode as well. Low blue light, off, low, middle, or high. These are effective, but they also give a rather green tint to the image, so it gives a warm green look to the image, but it does reduce that blue color channel and reduces blue light output very effectively, particularly the middle and high settings. Next, you've got Other. You can change the language that the OSD is displayed in. Menu time, so how long after the last button press before the menu will automatically disappear. Or if you want to get rid of it manually, you can just press the menu button a few times again and it will disappear. You can change the horizontal and vertical position of the menu on the screen, adjust a transparency effect if you want to have it looking a little bit more like that. Not really too fussed about that either way. OSD rotate, so this just allows you to rotate the OSD to portrait or various other orientations depending on how you've got the monitor set up. I know you couldn't see that on the video, but it just did what you'd expect, and it means you can use the OSD regardless of the orientation of the monitor. And there's Reset, which resets everything to the factory defaults. There's then Information, and this repeats some of the stuff which is down there. So you've got the resolution the monitor's currently running at, as well as the current refresh rate. And you don't need to be on the information section. That was actually there on other parts of the menu as well. And just to show you quickly, if you're using adaptive sync, the monitor's using VRR, variable refresh rate, then this will change according to the frame rate if it's within the VRR window. So I'll just quickly launch NVIDIA's G-Sync pendulum demo, which will cause this to fluctuate. So you'll see that that will quickly adjust according to the frame rate of the content. So thankfully I don't need to use this menu system anymore for a little bit. And that's all there was to the Nixius NX-EDG27X OSD on-screen display menu system. Be sure to check out the full review on PCmonitors.info. There's a link to that in the description of the video, alongside information about how you can support the work that we do.